This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hey man, just thought I'd talk to you about a movie that I saw today that I thought was very good. It's called The Night Comes for Us, directed by Timu Janto. Now, again, would that it were so simple. Don't know how well I'm going to do for the pronunciations, but this is I believe, Indonesian martial arts movie. And it's interesting. I could be completely wrong, but I'm not sure how well known and how advanced and how brilliant the Indonesian martial arts movie scene was before Gareth Evans did that movie, The Raid, of course, and the sequel, The Raid 2. But I've seen a few in the last while, and that industry is cooking at the moment. And this one is no different. It's probably give you everything you want from a martial arts movie. It stars this guy called Joe Taslim. I've seen him a few times in various things where he popped up randomly. He popped up in the TV show Blind Spotting in, I think it was season 1. And Blind Spotting, of course, is that adaptation of the movie Blind Spotting, which I think you didn't like very much, but I liked it quite a lot. And he's one of the main characters in the TV show called Warrior, which is based on some works by Bruce Lee, I think it is. And the character he plays in that is very reminiscent of a young Jet Li. He's got that calm, controlled aura of badassery in that show. He's absolutely fantastic. So, and again, that's an English speaking show. So when he showed up in this movie, I really was delighted, because on the cover of this movie was another fantastic Indonesian star that we love, Iko Uwais, who of course is from The Raid. And yeah, Joe Taslim is the lead in this, and this guy is massive. I think he's brilliant. Like everything you want in an action star. He's got the physique, he's got the charisma, he's got the moves, he's got a fighting style. So to get a star vehicle from this guy is fantastic. And I think this movie is going to be adapted into a graphic novel as well, and it does have that graphic novel type of appeal to it as well. And in the same way, the Raid 2 had this colorful, extreme cast of characters that just seem like anime villains or something you would see in Sin City, but in a martial arts movie, that it really just adds to it. So the setup of this movie is Joe Taslim plays this character named Ito, who is, so basically there's 6 elite enforcers for these triads that control these areas of Indonesia, and they basically have got carte blanche to do whatever they want to do, the most heinous shit, in order to enforce the gangs and the drug trade. They basically can do whatever they want. And yeah, so in the opening moments, we're presented to this horrible scene where these villagers get massacred as this little girl looks on, and we see Ito, and he's seems to be one of the head enforcers, or at least one of the henchmen. It's not really clear. And he decides to seemingly repent his way and save the girl for whatever reason, and kill all these mercenaries and basically save her. So at that point, he's changed sides. And I really like these type of stories and these action setups where you have this really bad character that you can kind of believe has snapped, and the opposite in the way of snapped going on a killing spree, although he does to save the girl, but snapped in a way that I've done enough bad shit and now I just can't watch another innocent person die, and the innocence is personified in this girl character. And I love that type of setup, and it's framed in this way that this guy isn't a good guy. He's done some horrible stuff, but if he can just save this girl, then he can make amends for the horrible stuff he's done. And especially when you find out that the entire village has been massacred just because of one villager in and up selling drugs that they shouldn't have. So it really sets the stake of how heinous these triads and these enforcers are. So I like when movies gives us multiple points of, or multiple ports of call, shall we say, where you don't quite know who's going to be the main character, where you don't quite know who's going to be the main good guy, or you don't quite know where it's exactly going to go. So you're introduced to Ito's old gang, and they're a very colorful cast of characters that end up looking after the girl while Ito goes on this quest to get all this money to get out of town. And then we're introduced to Iko Uwais character, who I believe is out of the country, and he's this enforcer character at this club, and we see this great scene where he kicks the shit out of a bunch of people. There's a lot of kicking the shit out of people in this movie, as you can imagine. And so the movie grows and grows. It's not like a movie where, okay, we've got one guy that's going to be chased by a bunch of other people. No, we kept on getting introduced to more people that makes the world feel a lot more bigger, where, oh, I wonder what Iko Uwais' character has got to do with this. Oh, he's seems to be conflicted, and there's just nice touches that keep you guessing in between all the great martial arts in this movie, where you're thinking, is he going to go and help this Ito character? Is he going to hunt him down? He seems very conflicted. So we see him getting called in to hunt down Ito and the girl. Meanwhile, we're introduced to the gang that's tasked with protecting the little girl. So we get these simultaneous fights all at once, where we get this fantastic scene in the Butchers where Joe Taslim gets in a fight with all these characters, and it's just very well choreographed and fantastically realized. A nice mix of violence and set pieces and staging, and it's very well done. And while this is going on, we have this scene where these new cast of characters are introduced even more. So now you've got this white girl with blonde hair who seems even more badass, and her girlfriend who has a yo-yo type killing device, and the white girl has a special dagger. So we're getting introduced to more and more badass characters at all times, and it just makes the world seem more epic, and it makes you start doing head-to-heads in your mind when you're thinking, oh, I wonder who would win when it gets to this fight. And I wonder what happens when these two characters meet. And we get this great sequence in the house where maybe 40 or 50 characters break in, and it's reminiscent of that scene in the corridor in Old Boy where they're desperately trying to defend the girl, and it's just waves and waves, and our heroes are getting worn down, and all the time they're actually kicking ass, and the reward for that is now the white chick and her girlfriend come up the elevator as head bosses, and it really escalates it even more, and you're thinking, holy fuck, they are doomed, which they are, but the girl manages to escape. And while this is happening, we get this great scene where Joe Taslim's character has since been captured, but he wakes up in the police car, who have to take the call in the elevator because it would look suspicious that the police aren't there, since it's their area, I guess, where they're meant to be patrolling. So the way they interconnect all these things in this movie is absolutely fantastic as well. And yeah, it's just madness and everything you want from this action movie. And up until this point, I've only seen Iko playing a good guy. He's very cookie cutter in The Raid and The Raid 2. I think he's in that movie with Mark Wahlberg as well, the Longest Mile or the 1 Mile Yard or something like that. I can't remember what it is. Even though he seems to be a bad guy in that early on, he's actually a good guy, I think, if I have that correctly. He's really good as a bad guy. And again, even though he's conflicted as a bad guy, he's got a nice bit of really rootless bad guy energy and charisma that I wouldn't have quite thought until I've seen this movie. And it's amazing as well where, and again, this is his second language, but in this movie there's a bunch of languages spoken. I think there's Indonesian, there's Chinese, and there's English. And some of the scenes where Iko Uwais has to do English, it's amazing how much less charisma he has until he switches back into his native tongue where he's much more comfortable with, and how just his charisma blossoms again. So he switches in and out, which is pretty cool. And yeah, so we get all these great action sequences, and then another character is introduced, this chick on a motorbike who has a sniper rifle with a laser beam on it, and you're thinking, Jesus Christ, this is like something you'd get in a 10-part TV series prolonged, that we're just getting a pure adrenaline rush for 2 hours, and it just constantly keeps you engaged. It constantly finds different ways to bring about these fight sequences. And one of the things the movie does as well, it does a lot of fade to blacks to cut short a scene where you're thinking, wait, what happened there? And then it goes back to it. So the editing is quite interesting in this movie as well. So it makes you feel like there's action scenes happening concurrently at the same time as well. That's very enjoyable. And yeah, it gives you everything you want. And later on, there's two really good head-to-heads that are built up in this movie, and that's between the chick on the motorcycle, who's actually a model, and I think I don't think she does any martial arts per se. I don't know if she learned it from this movie. Her name is Julie Estelle. I had a slight problem with her in this movie because she just looks too skinny. So when she's doing the scenes where she's fighting, it's a little bit unbelievable at times. And I know this movie is a complete unbelievable movie because people are getting stabbed and cut that should long be dead. So I certainly keep it out of my mind. So I don't really mind that, but there was a few scenes, especially where she has a one-to-one with Joe Taslim, where she gets the better of him, that I'm thinking, just don't buy her punches, and her level of physicality is going to beat that guy. So, but she's got a great scene later on in the movie where she's against the two female characters, and it's a 2-on-1 basically, but it's just a fantastic fight. But the climax between Joe Taslim and Iko Uwais is definitely one of the greatest on-screen fights I've ever seen in a martial arts movie. It's a showdown at the very end where they absolutely rip each other to shreds. There's people punching metal bars and missing. There's people kicking their leg off fucking metal bars and missing. There's people getting stabbed through the cheek and still fighting. There's people getting their limbs broken, and it's just a crazy fight. It reminds me of that type of thing you would see in the UFC, where, and I think I mentioned this before in other movies, where there's a stamina to the violence, where you just see people doing these fantastic kicks and these punches, and it's taking their toll on them. So at a certain point, their kicks and their movements and their grunts and their groaning and it starts to get a bit messy, and it starts to get a bit unchoreographed, even though that's entirely intentional, and it brings a certain flavor to the fight that you feel like these two were very fresh early on in the fight, and now we're getting to the real slugfest slobber knuckle to end it off. And and because there's enough character development between the Joe Taslim character and Iko Uwais and their previous gang, it is a bit more than a fight. They do just enough character to bring some emotion to the proceedings as well. But yeah, this is just a real kick-ass good time. Multiple threads weaving in to make stuff more interesting than they are. It's got really silly, fun action moments at times where characters put a metal-plated mops sign in their chest, take bullets, and tape themselves up with paper to take hits. It's got all that type of stuff, but if you're in the mood for that type of action movie, it's one of the best ones around, I'd say. But I guess if you're not in the mood for something like that, then you might think this is just stupid, but I loved it.
You've ended your voice note there with some very fateful words. If you're in the mood for it, it's one of the best action movies around. If you're not in the mood for it, maybe not. It's a couple of weeks since you sent that voice note. I've been watching my horror movies, gone through October, and then I've been taking a little break from movies. So just catching up with this movie now. It's a Friday night, coming up on midnight. And I'll send you my thoughts now. Hopefully it's not too far gone in your memory to respond. So there's a movie that was on my radar, I think pretty much from when it was released. It was released, IMDb tells me, in 2018. So quite a while ago at this point. Obviously, we're both big fans of The Raid. There seems to be something going on in Indonesia. I've only seen The Raid 2, now this movie, and I think I caught one other one that came out after The Raid 2. But I'm sure there's a lot of other movies out there. I know that this director, whose name I'll equally struggle to pronounce, Timo Tjahjanto, I think. I know he's made a few things. I think his background is as a writer. And obviously these actors like Iko Uwais, or whatever he's called, they popped up here and there. I think he's in like some of the Fast and Furious movies and Star Wars and all sorts. So that industry definitely seems to have spread a bit. I'd imagine that The Raid was a very instrumental movie in that. I know Gareth Evans had made Moran 2 before that, but I think the success of the Raid, both the international commercial success of it, but also the creative success of it, I'd imagine would have served as a real catalyst for a local explosion of action cinema. But also just watching this movie now, it makes me think about how influential the Raid has been. Sorry, I got a bit of cough. So the Raid came out. I mean, the action landscape prior to the Raid was it was considered to be a pretty bleak state. Obviously, there was the action heyday of the 80s, and then I guess the 90s with Face Off and Speed and all that. But yeah, that era, 80s and 90s, I kind of look at that as like the beginning of action movies, because of course you can say that, like, you know, old spaghetti westerns or some certain war movies and stuff are action movies, but I don't really think of them as action movies. I think of things like First Blood as sort of beginnings of what I consider action movies. When I'm thinking about action movies, when I'm thinking I want to watch an action movie, when I'm talking about action movies, that's really when it starts for me. Things before then, they don't quite fit into that mold. So, first 20 years of that, great movies, great action movies, kind of doing what you want an action movie to do. And then it got a little bit more sparse. You had your Paul Greengrass, you had your District 9, the odd one popping up here and there, but I think The Raid was a bit of a wake-up call. And the influence of that movie, now I don't know, I haven't read interviews and stuff that I can verify that all the movies that I think are influenced by The Raid were, but I'd be flabbergasted to find, for example, that John Wick isn't a direct result of The Raid. And John Wick comes out the same year as The Raid 2. And I'd say The Raid 2 is the best action movie ever made. And I think John Wick is inspired by The Raid, and then the subsequent John Wick franchise is inspired by The Raid 2, because one of the things that The Raid 2 really brought in a big way to this new, it's not like they invented this, but they brought it into it was an addition from the first movie. And you referenced it. It's all over in The Night Comes for Us. It's the dominant characteristic of the John Wick sequels, and that's this colorful cast of characters. Everyone's got a gimmick. Everyone feels like they've come out of an anime movie. And yeah, I think that's you've said many times in your voice note, this movie gives you everything you want. It's exactly what you want. You kept on saying, and I'm like, is that exactly what I want? There's so many things that I dislike about The Night Comes for Us, and there's so many things, like elements of it, that are kind of symptoms of what doesn't work for me in modern action. Now, there's things I like about it as well. We can get onto that in a minute, but that thing of everyone's a character and everyone's got a gimmick, and everyone's kind of like the main star of their own little mini movie kind of thing, that really takes me out of it. And it's, of course, The Night Comes for Us is a very kind of silly, camp, over the top, kind of ridiculous movie. So it's like, whatever, fine. Don't really care that much. But comparing it to The Raid, which is so much classier, or comparing the John Wick sequels to John Wick, like when you take away that level of comic bookness, if you take away that level of over the top fantasy type anime stylings, and you bring it down to more of a grounded crime film, I think that is massively beneficial. You actually mentioned Julia Stell, who's the sniper girl in this movie. I immediately recognized her as Hammer Girl from The Raid 2. And Hammer Girl, and then that guy with the baseball bat, and this handful of characters in The Raid 2 that I was really unsure about when I watched the film. And, you know, like many films, when a film can be a masterpiece, yet have elements that are questionable. And I think that's what they brought into that movie. But also it's such a serious, grounded, measured film that it can kind of withstand that. Whereas The Night Comes for Us, for me, it doesn't rest on a firm foundation. So yeah, I think, you know, The Raid has been massively influential. Then John Wick, which is inspired by The Raid, has been massively influential. That's where you get like Extraction and all basically, you can trace back contemporary action cinema largely to The Raid, I think. And certainly these Indonesian movies, the two stars of The Night Come to Us, both in The Raid. And I think it's had an influence on action cinema, but I think it's also had an influence on me in the sense that whenever I see an action movie now, and it's dying off a bit now, but certainly in the aftermath of The Raid 2, for quite a few years, whenever I'd see an action movie, I'd be probably a bit too harsh on it, because it must have been like listening to rock music after the Beatles for like a decade. It was like, okay, all right, fair enough. You know, this is all right. It's not the Beatles. Like that kind of hangover. When I sit down now to watch a Indonesian action film, especially one that you've recommended, maybe my expectations are a little too high, and I don't know what kind of circumstances this film came to you or what kind of expectations you had. I wouldn't say I had sky high expectations, and I thought it was fine. I thought it was decent, but I think it's missing a few things that prevent it from being a great action movie in my eyes. The first one is plot, like character, story, all that stuff. If I think back to that, there's no action film that I think is a great action film that isn't anchored in like well worked out story and character. Now, it doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be some like, you know, complex film noir plot or something. It could be there's a bomb on the bus and the guy needs to get everyone off the bus or something like that. It can be some simple, clear thing. It can have characters that we care about, that we understand, that we're on board with their mission. This film, in my opinion, is all over the place. I mean, the thing that they're ideally trying to anchor you to is he wants to save the little girl. I mean, that is really all you're given, because you don't get his backstory until 2/3 the way through the movie. So you can't kind of, as you mentioned, that this film constantly tries to do this thing of like not give you all the context, maybe later on give you the context, cut away at crucial moments. It's kind of a bit of a early Guy Ritchie, Tarantino type. Isn't it interesting when we kind of like fill in the blanks later and, you know, show things out of order and fun. You know, sometimes that works. I don't think it works at all. I think it like massively works against this film, but sometimes that works, and I think it's a valid approach to take. But in this case, you go into the film, or at least I do, with no reason to be on board with this guy. Like, it's clear that he's for years been working as this like brutal, savage human trafficker, massacring monster, and now he's decided to save this girl. Okay, all right. Well, at least I hope the girl doesn't die. That's my kind of thing that I can get on board with, I suppose. There, almost immediately, he decides to do this robbery. Not just leave town, run away with the girl like we've seen in every other action movie, but for some reason he needs millions and millions of dollars or whatever to escape and start a new life. Completely don't buy that conceit. It seems like it's just artificial. Give us an action film, have him go up against some sort of opponent and get him into that butcher place where the action scene is. So he's off, leaving the girl, not protecting her, off on his own, doing some heist thing. I'm like, this is such a muddled and messy and unclear script. Like, in terms of investing in a character, the action scene in the slaughterhouse or whatever, the butchers, is really good. It's really strong, and it's got lots of, like the John Wick sequels. The best thing about this film for me is individual 1-second moments, which are numerous. There's probably 50 like 1 to 2 second moments in this film that are really, really good. And that's what I think when I walk out of a John Wick sequel, I go, this bit was brilliant, this bit was brilliant, this bit. I'm not referring to scenes, sometimes I'm referring to scenes, but the best thing is that great little idea. Like, just off the top of my head, in Night Comes For Us, there's one bit where the sniper girl sticks a knife in the arm of the blonde girl and like pulls the knife along her arm, kind of ripping her arm upwards. It's hard to describe, but it's just, okay, that's a great idea. And you put that in, you execute it. Now, compared to The Raid, many of the action beats in this film, or like those kind of individual ideas, are hampered a bit by how CGI heavy they are, how mediocre the cinematography is at times. And I don't think it has, saying something is lesser than The Raid or The Raid 2 in terms of delivering on action is not really much of a slander. This film is still significantly above most action films, I think, in that department. But I do think there's a technical limitations, and it's a technically imperfect film. But anyway, really what it all comes down to is character and motivation. Why do I care about this person? Why do I care about that? This film's constantly, you're all over the place, different locations. You don't really know what, like, you haven't got a clear unifying thing of he's got the girl with him and he's got to protect her, or like what's his motivation at any given time. Like, there's the core thing of protect the girl just seems to occasionally come into the film, but most of the time it's just, let's find artificial way to have a goodie and a baddie in a room together. That's what I felt. I rarely felt that perfect, clear thing that you get in The Raid, for example. And there wasn't much in the way of characters that I cared about. Even the girl, I mean, I know that you could say, like, cute little kid, innocent victim, what more do you need? But you kind of need even just 1 or 2 scenes of her, like, drawing a picture or something that makes her, I don't think she has a line of dialogue, does she? Maybe she has 1 or 2. Like, it's all a bit thin for me. I looked up the director afterwards and I saw what he's got on the horizon. One of the films that he's got upcoming is Nobody 2. I was trying to think of, like, why does the film Nobody with Bob Odenkirk work so much better than this film for me? Now, Nobody is a film that kind of collapses in the third act anyway, but initially it's so rooted in character. It's so, you're so invested in the story and the people in it, rather than just it feeling like stunt choreographers getting together to practice making action cinema with no real plot or character or anything going on. And I think for me, that's just something that, like I said, I don't think there's any action movie I love that doesn't have strong character and plot stuff. So that's a flaw of this film for me. It's too wacky, it's too unfocused, it's too all over the place. These are things that you seem to have loved. Like you said, we're trying to work out who the hero is. We don't know who the hero is. Is it going to be this person or this person? They keep on bringing in other elements. And I'm like, yeah, they keep on bringing in other elements. they keep on bringing in different characters. They keep on, like, half the time you're not with the main character, which I get that those are not objective complaints, or otherwise we would be in agreement, and we both have disliked that. You've liked that about it. I haven't liked it about it. I just had very little in this film to like really anchor my personal investment in. Yeah, just some of the other points that you made, like that thing of cutting away every time, well, not every time, but often cutting away and later revealing what the truth of that scene was, or cutting it away at the beginning of an action scene. I found that a bit repetitive. Like, for example, whenever a key character is about to get killed, they get shot at, but we don't see them being shot. So then we can later on reveal that they're alive, but you kind of know that they're alive because there's no other reason to not show them be killed, right? It wouldn't make any sense to not show that. So it feels a bit pointless. Sometimes it's a budget saving thing where, like, just before we get an action scene, it cuts away so we don't see the action scene, and it's like, okay, I get that is a budgetary consideration, like, save that, but that's kind of all that I'm here for. So there was things like that I didn't like. There's one weird thing going on in this film where they massively bump up the saturation on the color red so that all of the blood and, well, I think it's designed to just amp up the blood, but it has the effect of amping up every red element on screen in quite a distracting way. It's obviously very gory. That's fine, but yeah, even like you mentioned that, like, the end brawl is one of the best fight scenes you've ever seen. It feels like a very conscious attempt at what we get in the end of the Raid movies, which is, again, like, let's build up this character, let's build up that character, let's have them face off, and that'll be like the most epic fight. And let's just kind of, we don't need any henchmen, we don't need any elaborate, they don't need to be like on the top of a train. We'll just get them in a room and get them fighting. That's appears at the end of this movie, as it does in the Raid movies. And yeah, it's good. They're obviously good fighters, but it feels like it's much more focused on the sort of torture porn aspect of it, like that film Lone Survivor, like that kind of, I don't know, there's something where, like, you want that stuff in it, but I would prefer more of an emphasis on the fight choreography than just on the gore. Like, it feels like that's more of the emphasis on the gore kind of thing. And I don't know. Now, I'm coming across very negative about it. I liked it fine. And as I said, I think I might be, I might have had higher expectations than this film really is suited to. Like, maybe this film is a better one to just like throw on an action film. To be fair, if I did watch this with the expectations I have with just a random new action film, I probably would think fairly highly of it. And I suppose, like I said, it's got the legacy of the Raid to live up to and stuff. But I do think, and this has been the case with American films, this is the case with, like, Commando, for example. If a film doesn't have good plot or character stuff going on, like, if I've got no way of investing in the film other than man protect girl, but then that's basically never in the film. Like, I think he's probably in the same location as the girl for about 5 minutes across a 2-hour movie. If if it's that unclear what I'm watching and it's basically just watch a whole bunch of action for 2 hours, then it doesn't really matter how good the action is. It's difficult for me to get too invested in it. So like that's why I'm not putting this as a great action movie. I will put it as a good action movie, a fun action movie. I liked it, and I'd like to see more from this director, because maybe it's a case of get a better writer involved, get a better idea, something. Clearly, like, as you said, Indonesia, they've got a scene there. I have to believe then that it's more than just one director, Gareth Evans, that can crystallize that scene into great cinema. There's certainly a lot of talented people there, and clearly a lot of dedication and work. But the whole thing of like this crew that like, you know, was, what were they? So they were a criminal outfit, but then they got involved with a worse criminal outfit, and then some of them just turned more bad, and some of them, like, it's all over the place. It's messy, man. I don't know what to say, but I'm glad you had a great time with this. Yeah, I think the difference in our experiences with it, partially down to mood, partially down to just a differing appetite for some of the things in this film.
Hey man, just getting back to your "the night comes for us" message. I listened to it Friday. Obviously, I sent my voice note, I think October 29th, so a few weeks now. Yeah, don't you know my new tactic, just to make a point of something, is just to continuously say it gives you everything you want until you agree, almost like a Scientology cult. So I'm just gonna say for the next 20 minutes, it just gives you everything you want. What more is there to say? But it's funny as well. I'm gonna have a go at you, not actually have a go at you, obviously, but I'm going to frame something in a way without listening to my first voice note. So I don't know if I instigated this framing from my voice note, or you just came to it yourself, or I'm as guilty for taking the discussion this way. I don't think it's a good thing to, let's say, compare this movie to The Raid 2 in terms of the standard that needs to be met, and therefore everything else be judged by. Because for me, if I'm watching, I don't know, for instance, we just did a horror marathon, or at least I got on board for Spooktober not so long ago, and there's various movies we watched in that, and if I'm watching The Sixth Sense, which is the standard, and then I'm watching a few other mystery ones, and I'm looking at it in terms of, well, it isn't The Sixth Sense. Or if I'm looking at every crime genre movie that I'll watch after The Godfather, and I have in my head, oh well, it's not The Godfather, or just anything along those lines. If I have an ideal to compare it to in my head, then I'm almost not taking the movie on its own merits. I'm bringing another movie into it in order to compare why this movie is a lesser version. And I'm not saying that doesn't also happen subconsciously. Of course it does. Absolutely. I'm not making a case for it at all. But I think because this is an Indonesian movie, because there is a famous Indonesian movie, or at least a duo of Indonesian movies, The Raid and The Raid 2, that combined with our limited knowledge of Indonesian cinema in general. Well, I can only speak for myself. Maybe you've got a lot of knowledge. It's almost like a combination of, well, I know this about Indonesia. Like, I don't think this would happen the same way for an American movie, maybe. I think these things happen more when something's brought to you from a movie country that you have less experience in. I'm not just talking to you. Like I said, maybe you actually do know a lot about Indonesian cinema. And it just becomes, well, that other movie that I really liked from that country was amazing. Now, you have said you also do it with John Wick as well, so I might be totally unfair. And I do remember mentioning that it's in my original voice note that you can't not think of The Raid 2. So I might have started this off, but when I mentioned it, it was more along the lines of the evolution of where something came from. I definitely wasn't comparing this movie to The Raid 2, and I feel like I definitely took it a lot more on its own merits. Now, I could be completely wrong in interpreting what you said, so feel free to correct me. But let me. It sounds to me like you have a hard time not comparing every movie like this to The Raid, including John Wick and things like that. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Absolutely. So I went into this movie not really having that in my head. First of all, because it's been so long since I've seen The Raid 2. It probably might be the case if I saw it in succession that I might have that experience. But for me, it's like I just don't remember much about The Raid 2 except it was amazing. And I remember liking The Raid 1 somewhat, but I wasn't overly impressed with it and actually didn't watch the sequel for a long time. So anyway, getting back to this movie. So you mentioned that you struggled to find a true line and something that you could grab onto with these characters, and a type of consistency and cohesiveness, and it never really stuck to a coordinated plot. I guess that'd be fair to say. So for me, having somebody do the most horrible things imaginable, like our main character, played by Joe Taslim, having an opening scene where a character has he's probably killed kids before, he's probably done these things before, but just having someone live in such a murky, horrible world and break from that and make a conscious decision to say they've had enough, even though they're probably unredeemable anyway. I find that very interesting. So that was enough for me to follow a character that was doing these horrible things, and when we're introduced to him, he has reached breaking point. Now, a lot of that character work, I guess you have to infer, and not that it's the greatest motivation of a character in the world, but for me, someone who's done horrible things and on, let's say, they work Monday to Friday, and on the Thursday, like, this is just a normal job, I've been doing this before, but I just have enough now. That is interesting for me to follow this character. And then I think it almost works to the strength of that, and it seems to be a weakness for you, that it doesn't stay on the journey you would think. Okay, this is going to be the guy following around the girl, who does have a few lines, by the way. She tells the woman assassin not to kill him at one point because he's been looking after her. So to have that taken away as a thread line in the story, where he's got to protect her and he doesn't even do a particularly good job at that, I find that more interesting. That now that he's switched, now that he has enough, he is trying desperately and badly to make amends, and it's in a very futile, pointless way. And the decision not to pair him with the girl for a lot of the time actually lets us spend a lot of time with this aimless, desperate character. So I really like that side of things. I can understand why you didn't. I also feel like, and again, this is not important to me at all, I feel like there is a good reason why he abandons her. And, well, I think, I don't know if you used the word abandon you, but leaves her. So first of all, he leaves her with the toughest bunch of people imaginable. So she's well protected. She's got Uncle Bobby and all these people. So he doesn't leave her with a bunch of schmucks. He leaves her with the most badass people that should be able to protect her. The problem is, and which is what I really liked about this scene as well, more badass people show up that are even more badass. So it's like, wow, if they can't even protect her, these people must be really bad. And again, this is all just window dressing to set up things that I care about in these movies, which is great fight sequences. And I think we repeatedly got these great fight sequences, and for me it was quite a logical progression of these setups. And then we have the main character, Ito. He leaves the girl to get money and passports because he needs to get out of the country. So for me, the fact that he needs to go and get money and the passports makes perfectly good sense to me. He leaves the girl where she's more protected instead of driving around town, going into these dodgy situations, and presuming she'd be safe in that building, rather than bringing her to a place where we get that great butcher sequence. So for me, all the steps of these moments to get us to the fight sequences worked really well, for me anyway. Now, what you were saying, that the John Wick movies and all these martial arts movies started giving people a gimmick. So I never really looked at it as a gimmick. And I guess if I was looking at it like it was a gimmick, then maybe I would have the same problems as you. Because for me, when I see characters given a little bit extra stuff beyond your just a henchman, even if it is, I've got this weapon, even if I've got this fighting style, in the context of martial art movies, for me, I don't see it so much as a gimmick. I see it as, oh, these people are more important now. Like, this is going to be a boss, and the more gimmick stuff they have, it makes me think, oh, they're going to be a higher up boss. And sometimes I can't really figure out what level boss they are, and that's what I really like. So the more and more people with quote unquote gimmicks that come into it, the more and more higher levels of the video game, so to speak, we've got to go to get these epic showdowns that I'm looking forward to. And I always know who the main boss is, but I don't often know who's going to be the boss number 2 and boss number 3. So for me, it just adds a lot more epicness to proceedings. So I really like that aspect to it, whereas traditionally speaking, in martial arts movies, we used to always be guaranteed the big guy, the big heavy, and he's probably final boss number 2, final boss number 3. But now we get a lot more, and that was a gimmick in itself, if you want to call it that. But now we get a lot more. We get a lot more attributes to these mostly one-dimensional hitmen and martial arts people, and it makes me think, oh, where's this fight gonna happen? Oh, who's gonna take him down or her down? Because she's got this extra ability almost. It's almost like a video game. And just referring to what you're saying in the final showdown, you felt it was like, I think he said a bit like torture porn. For me, I really enjoyed the fight because I felt like it was almost 2 death rattles of people who didn't want to fight. And when you contrast the pre-fight and just how they carried themselves through the movie, Iko Uwais doesn't even want to be there, and he is slowly dragged back into this world. Not that he's completely out, because we see him in his different country absolutely taking out people, but you get the impression he doesn't really want to take out his friend or former gang member, and Joe Taslim doesn't really have the fight in him he used to have as well, but he's got a desperation to him. So I like that contrast, the way they've been carrying themselves throughout the movie and even before, and with their dialogue, to the contrast we get in that final fight where they are just tearing chunks out of each other and they are just not giving in, and they're just going to continue to fight and fight and fight, where there's no real hero, where there's no real honor, where although there is stakes, the stakes are almost adjacent to them. But get those 2 guys in a ring and we are going to go. We're going to do everything it takes. So for me, in the context of the fighting, I didn't feel what you felt, and I thought the level of brutality we see was justified, and not just in the sense of, oh, look what we're going to do to these 2 people just to show you what we can do. So yeah, I'd say very different experiences. I've actually seen the next follow-up to this movie called The Stray Dogs. I think that's what it's called. I don't think it's as good as this. That's why I didn't drop a voice note. I didn't think it was necessary, but I felt a little bit like what your criticisms of this one was. I felt it was quite unfocused. So I get that there is that viewing experience that you've had, of course, and it's just that thing that you often have, isn't it? That when we have different opinions on these things, you recognize everything that's there. Although I feel like the film was a little bit more focused than you, but it's not like you really misunderstood anything. And it's just, we've watched the same film, we've just had different experiences. So it's always interesting when that happens as well. But like you, I came to this experience where I didn't really have any expectations as well. And I was so much more impressed than I thought I would be. And it seems to me you were thinking and looking for more beforehand. But yeah, interesting to hear your thoughts for sure.
Man, you got a killer memory. Almost 3 weeks ago, having seen that movie, to be able to remember all that. I think my brain at this point is watch the movie, kind of live with it for about 24 hours, and then it's just gone. Might as well not have seen it, except for just the broad strokes of like, I like that movie. Yeah, I think so. Just sort of like you touched on the expectations, the perhaps different expectations that we had there going into this. I think we're obviously both big fans of The Raid. We're both big fans of action movies. Sounds like I've seen The Raid 2 more recently. I think I revisited it about 3 years ago, I'd guess. But we probably both have, the antenna sort of perks up when you hear this is a potentially good action movie. And then maybe the fact that it's from Indonesia, it's got some of the same cast as The Raid. That maybe like levels it up a little bit more. So I would imagine that before either of us saw this movie, we probably both, it was on my IMDb watch list for years, probably since before it came out even. So I think we both just have like an interest in watching this, but not really massive expectations. And then one of us gets to it first and they recommend it to the other one. And I think that levels up the expectations a fair bit, for me at least. So I went into this with you having recommended it. And we're also very conservative in our recommendations. We don't really say to each other, you gotta watch this fucking movie. It's amazing. We usually try and just go, here's the movie. And then even though it's as restrained as it can possibly be, you still sort of translate it in your head. It's like, well, action movies are coming out left, right, and center. He's asking me to watch, or he's saying I should watch this one. So probably really good. And I already had an interest in it. I already thought it had potential. Maybe now it's a real gem. So I think I went in with some amount of high expectation. And I think knowing or suspecting at the very least that you would have liked this movie a lot more than me, or had a better experience with it on the night, because I think that is a factor. I then have sent my voice note to you in a bit more of a critical, negative kind of mindset. What I try to give some amount of lip service to, and perhaps failed in kind of delivering the sentiment, is that I liked this film. I think it's a good film. I wasn't bored by it. I had a good time with it. I think I definitely don't deliberately compare films to The Raid, but I think that when the Raid movies came out, and particularly The Raid 2, it was a real dark time for action cinema. There were still some gems coming out here and there, but for the most part, you might go an entire year without a good action movie coming out. It was that kind of, it was probably the worst time in the 40 or so years of action cinema existing, 40, 50, whatever it is. So when that came out, I was like, every action movie that came out, I was like, what you got? I'd watch the movie and I'd be like, good, not as good as The Raid 2. It was just like that immediate, it's kind of like I mentioned of the aftermath of the Beatles, or even just while the Beatles were out. It must have been pretty hard to avoid the comparison. Now we're many years removed from The Raid 2 and its influence has been huge, and I don't think it's been bested, but I'm not deliberately comparing movies to The Raid 2 or even thinking about it all that much. But I think, as you said, with this film in particular, which shares key cast members, is from the same country, is very much a copy of the Raid movies, like in so many ways. I know that martial arts movies have been made for decades, and a lot of what makes up the Raid is just martial arts movies. But the things that make the Raid movies distinct from just an old Jackie Chan movie or something are all over this film. It feels like, I don't think that there's a film that's ever been made that is a more obvious and direct point of comparison to The Night Comes For Us, or whatever it's called, than The Raid 2. So yeah, the comparisons come into my head. And I think I'm absolutely not expecting any film, maybe Until I Die, to hit the highs of The Raid 2 for that type of film. It's kind of like, if you're going to make that type of movie, then you can't do it any better, almost. Hopefully I'll be proven wrong on that. But yeah, I wouldn't deliberately kind of burden a film with like, you have to beat The Raid 2 or I'm not going to like you. But I think what I will compare this film to is maybe my 50 favorite action movies, or my 30 favorite action movies. Let's say Mad Max Fury Road, Die Hard, Face Off, even, like I said, much lesser films like Nobody, like films that I think are not necessarily masterpieces, but which give you a hell of a lot of character and story to invest in. You mentioned in this film that there's what you really care about is the action scenes, and you feel like this film, and forgive me if I'm paraphrasing you incorrectly here, but it felt like you were saying this film did enough story-wise. It gave you enough to get you to what you care about, which is the action scenes. And I completely agree with that sentiment, with that, like, what I want from an action film is that it gives me enough to get me to the action. That's what I want too. But as we've discovered, for me, this film doesn't give you everything you need. It doesn't give you everything you want, which was your refrain in the first voice note. I think the best thing about Fury Road is the action. The best thing about Speed is the action. The best thing about Face Off is the action. The question, and we've had different experiences with this film. I think we've fallen down on two different sides of the coin. For me, on a character and story level, this film absolutely does not give me what I need. And that your entry point into this film, which is that you seem to be very enamored by the idea of what if an absolute black-hearted, like, monster, vicious criminal just reached a breaking point. It was like, I can't do this anymore. I want to be a good guy, or I want to, whether it's a redemption arc or whatever. So that kind of, it sounds like that gave you enough character and story ammunition that you were like, now we can just be all out, balls to the wall action. I've got my emotional through line. I've got my narrative through line here. And that's that you've earned just action sequences at this point. I didn't get there with that setup at all. I didn't know anything about the character going into it. It's revealed towards the end of the movie that he was the head of that group and that he was like the 6 C's member. It's revealed towards the end of the movie that he was working as a 6 C's guy for years. It's left ambiguous forever why he really did that. Like, character motivations are just so fuzzy. He seems to be running some sort of criminal outfit with his little gang there. We don't know why he's doing that. We don't know the motivations going. I'm not saying we have to know that, but if we don't know why he was ever involved in organized crime in the first place, then we just have to assume that, like, it's not important. It's not a big part of his character. He is just like a criminal. That's what he does. Fair enough. Then one of the guys, Bobby, I think, gets involved with the 6 C's, and that leads them to this precarious situation where it feels like he has to become part of it. Completely don't buy that. Like, it didn't feel earned to me at all why he was confined into that pathway rather than, like, I don't know, going on the run or whatever. Then he goes into that. He becomes like top dog in that, vicious, brutal killer. I don't get that on a character level. Like, we've seen him earlier than that. We've seen him later than that. There's not really anything there in the performance for me that backs up the idea of him having been completely immoral, like cold-hearted or whatever. And if he wasn't, then why did he stick around? And then, yeah, him going in and out of this enterprise feels very flimsy to me. And even to whatever extent it does work, is massively undercut by the jumbled up narrative way that it's shown to us. So if you go purely off the strength of what we see in the opening scene, or rather what we don't see because they cut away from it, what you can infer that he was one of those guys and he decided to save the little girl. That's all I've got. I mean, if it got you there, great. But I could have definitely done with more character scenes, or more, just like something stronger. And then if it had stayed with that, if it had gone, now it's a bad guy protects an innocent kid type of movie, which we've seen many times before, but I don't really mind that. I think that if it works, it works. But he immediately leaves her. You're saying he leaves her in the hands of these very competent, badass people. We don't know that. Like, we don't know that until they can sort of inexplicably fight back and hold their own. And you're like, oh, wait. So they're not just lambs for the slaughter. He seems to leave them for no reason. You're saying he's going to get money and passports. I don't remember the passport thing. I think you may be mistaken on that front. I think the passports are being either he's going to get money so he can buy passports, or he already has the passports. But I don't think he's going to get passports literally from that location. I think he's just going to get money. And of all the places he could go get money, like his bank account, all of his old friends cobbling together like a couple of grand so he can just immediately go on the run, he goes into this den of thieves, belly of the beast, right into the midst of this incredible, insurmountable threat that he's trying to run away from so that he can get an insane amount of money. And it just, to me, you're going, it all works logically, all fits together logically. I don't think it does, personally. And I think it's classic, put him in an action scene. And that's what this film is the whole way through, is just put person in action scene. Okay, how we do that? Could it be that no, forget, whatever, just put them in an action scene. They go to an action scene. That's it. No, like it's very, very shallow plot construction, very, very shallow screenwriting. And yeah, did not work for me on those levels. And I don't think that there's a action film I really love that doesn't have strong plot and character stuff in it. Like, I think a lot of people who hate action films would say that something like Speed doesn't have good plot or character work, or Terminator 2 or Aliens or Face Off or anything like that, Predator. To me, those films have very strong plot and character work, because very strong doesn't mean convoluted, complex, doesn't even mean thought-provoking. It just means it functionally works. And I think that this film just doesn't functionally work on that way. Now, the action fight choreography, to me, that's what this film is almost exclusively concerned with. And that is very good. I think I will say that I'll go back to it again. The Raid movies have radically changed cinema. We now live in a era of good action movies, like at least good action. The John Wick sequels, for all their flaws, have very good action. Things like Extraction, very good action. So seeing action done this well is really, really fun and really enjoyable. And that's why I liked the film. I want to keep coming back to the fact that I liked the film, but it is much less special than it was when I saw really good action 10, 15 years ago, whenever The Raid came out. And it was like, a drink of water in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Now it's like, yeah, this is really good fight choreography. Again, I think it's not shot as well as some of these films are. And I think the heavy reliance on CGI and just general digital trickery, like I said, punching up the reds and stuff, the overall highly artificial look of this film makes it a bit less crunchy and brutal and tangible and visceral compared to the Raid movies, for example. It just feels a bit more video game-ish, which brings me on to the gimmicky stuff. So I think, you're talking about like the way action films have always had these iconic characters, the Heavy or whatever. To me, the Heavy, for example, is, yes, it's a gimmick, or like there's always like the one guy in the crew who's like just a sadist, mad. He's a bit mad, right? Those are gimmicks in a way, but they make sense. They're believable. They don't take away from the believability of the scenario, because if you get a group of terrorists and like, or bank robbers like in Die Hard or wherever it is, you get a crew of bad guys. The fact that one of them is a crazy sadist, like kind of off kilter dude, or one of them is a massive big muscly guy, that I buy that. Realistic. I buy that. Definitely, it might be a little heightened, but it's fairly realistic. If one of them pulls out a yo-yo and starts doing yo-yo, or they've got like a cassette Walkman that they listen to, or their weapon of choice is a baseball bat, like in The Raid 2, or they carry a cat with them all the time, or they're blind, like in John Wick 4. That stuff to me detracts from the realism. And now we're going into like Mortal Kombat territory. Now, I'm not saying these things are objectively bad. I'm just saying, on my own personal preferences, a film like The Night Comes For Us, I'm looking for it to be more realistic. This film, with that kind of gimmicky, lore-heavy stuff, which wasn't really a big part of John Wick 1 and is the dominant style or stylistic choice of the John Wick sequels, and it is reminiscent of Robert Rodriguez movies like Once Upon a Time in Mexico or the Sin City movies or Spy Kids even. Everything's super heightened, super comic booky. It's they've created their own alternate universe fantasy land. That is much harder for me to invest in. Like I like Leon, which is very stylized as a movie, much more than I like The Fifth Element, which is, now we've gone over the hedge, we're into the land of like cartoon characters. So that's the gimmick thing for me. It's like the gimmick of someone having their own fighting style, or being short, or being whatever, like female or something like that. Something where I'm like, okay, I can still buy this when they're like, this could happen, this could be part of this crew. That is okay. It's the gimmick of like, every time before I start a fight, I put my boombox down and start playing like a disco song, and then I start dancing, and that's how I fight. I'm just exhausted by that. It's like Kick-Ass or something. I'm exhausted by that that thing. And tomorrow I could see a movie that makes me kind of makes me charmed by that. But overall, I think it detracts movies. And I think in the case of The Night Comes For Us and John Wick, it's like putting that in a organized crime sort of thing just doesn't work that well for me. But anyway, people love it. I get that. And, they're probably it's probably a fairly good decision on a commercial level to put it in here. Certainly an easy way to make characters stand out, make them memorable, make them more unique. But if you look at The Raid 2, I know it has a couple of those characters, but the tone of it is so serious. It's much more like a Scorsese movie or something. That's what I like about it. That's the tone that I'm looking for. Anyway, that's a difference of opinion, but it's an interesting subject matter, I think. The last thing is the final fight, which I think you've made a very compelling case for why that final fight is so strong, and how it's you describe it as the death rattle with the two primary characters of the film, and how it's adjacent to the stakes of the movie rather than deciding the stakes of the movie. I think that's a really good way of putting it, and I agree that it does feel like it reminds me of like the end of a Rocky movie or something, where they're killing each other. So like they're fighting into oblivion, and I think that's the best justification of that scene that could be made. Also, I thought it was a good scene. I thought it was there was a lot of good stuff in it, and I'm not against it in general, but I think it comes together a lot better in my head now listening to you talk about it and your kind of take on it. I think taken more as a straight action film or action, like baddie versus goodie climax of a movie, it felt again like it was a very, very conscious reference to the crescendo scenes in The Raid, which are all get the two characters in a room and just have them go at it until one of them's dead. And it's usually like exhaustingly long and like really takes it out of everyone. Because this film went so far into the gore side of things with like blades sticking out cheeks and stuff like that, I started to feel a little bit more like I'm just sitting here thinking about special effects and a competition of how gory you can get rather than the investment in the fight. You know, like that fight in They Live with Keith David, which I love, but at a certain point you stop thinking about a fight between two characters and you start thinking about it on a filmmaking level of like they're really going to keep going with this. That's kind of where I went with this. Whereas with The Raid, I'm fully immersed and thrilled by those fights, like beat by beat, moment to moment. I'm not thinking about filmmaking decisions. So yeah, but it was fine. And I think overall, you know, when we have these conversations and one of us likes it more than the other one, especially if one likes it a fair bit more than the other one, then inevitably the person who likes it less is going to spend all their time talking about what it does wrong. The person who likes it more is going to spend all their time talking about what it does right. I do think that it's a good movie that I liked. As much as action cinema has improved dramatically, it's not like we get a great action movie every month or something. So this is a good one, you know. Granted, it's 5-6 years old now, so I can't really think back to what other action films came out in 2018 and where this would kind of fall in that ranking. But you know, it's good. It's missing something in the character and story department for me personally. And yeah, I guess that sort of covers everything that you went over. I don't really have much else to add, but it's interesting that you've seen the next film by this director and liked it less, because I was actually, when I watched it, I was like, I wonder, did this director become a little more mature with the next film? So, when you see a film like this, it's like, okay, it's got things that are more, you could go one way, you could go into the more serious, mature, less wacky, jokey, kind of cheesy, camp, comic booky direction, or you could go more so into that, whole hog into that, where it's like completely laughable. And of course, I don't know if this director has gone in either of those directions with the follow-up film, but it did definitely out that newer film. But perhaps what the thing I'll do is wait for Nobody 2 to come out, which he's apparently directing, and see how that compares. Definitely a director that I think would be worth watching more of. There's another one we watched this year called, I think it's called Kill, Indian movie set on a train. And that came into my mind a few times watching this, because I felt like Kill was also a sort of way over the top, non-stop action, almost exclusively action, super brutal, super gory, a celebration of what they can do on a technical level. I think The Night Comes For Us and Kill are both, let's really go all out in celebrating what we can do with fight choreography and with special effects. And I think, again, Kill for me, not to just keep going back to this, but I do think it's the big overriding point that's dominated my experience with this film. Kill, I'm invested in the story and character. I'm there on the through line. I just always know why someone is where they are. I always feel like people are doing what kind of makes logically sense for them to be doing. And I just feel like I have all of the character context that I need to work my way through that journey. And you did here, apparently, in this one. So it could have been just the mood I was in, or who knows. But yeah, decent flick anyway.
Hey, man. Yeah, interested in hearing your thoughts. So putting aside the narrative discrepancies in our experience, and also, by the way, I think sometimes it is actually good for you to explain everything you found negative about the movie while I explain everything that I found positive, especially if I like it a lot more than you, just because if there is a world where someone's ever listening to this, then we've covered all the sides of it. But yeah, putting aside the narrative discrepancies, as I said, I totally understand your point regarding the heavy, in terms of, well, the heavy or the psycho are natural occurrences in in gangs, I guess. You're going to have someone who's an enforcer. You're going to have someone that's a bit of a psycho. So it feels like something natural to you, which I completely understand. Whereas Yo-Yo Girl is, it's kind of like, well, what, you've risen to the top in the yo-yo championships and now you're so deadly with your yo-yo. I get it, and I understand where you're coming from. From my point of view, I think it's almost one and the same, really, when I'm watching these movies. Because on the one hand, when I start watching this, any fight that involves all these martial arts would be over in 5 seconds flat, right? They'd be over in 10 seconds. You would have died of internal bleeding in the first act. So the level of absolute violence and mayhem and punishment that our fighters can endure to begin with is already putting this into the realms of a comic book. To me, on some level, now I've never thought about it as a comic book, so maybe that's unfair. But in terms of the realm of the fantastical, that's probably a better way of putting it. Just the whole central conceit, even in the Raid and the Raid 2, he ain't getting beyond the first floor in the Raid 1 taking that much damage, right? So if I'm already accepting that this guy can take 2 million kicks and be fine, then I've already made the first leap that allows all these other things to happen, right? And if you're talking about martial arts movies from before, I haven't charted the history. I'm not a big martial arts guy, but just from watching older movies, and again, as you said, the Raid revolutionized action movies, 100%. A lot of things that came before that, or even if you're talking about Jackie Chan movies, Bruce Lee movies, Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, the fighting is a lot more simple and a lot less extreme. So you kind of can believe that it's a brawl. But once you're used to that, you've got to give people more shocks and give people more extreme stuff. The best analogy I can give, because I'm a wrestling guy, as you know, there used to be a time with the early type of wrestling where it's very basic maneuvers, and then all the high octane moves like a super kick and all these things were only saved for the finishes, aka the end of the match, right? And I feel like martial arts movies evolved a little bit like that with the Raid. So it was early form wrestling, it was saved till the end, but then it got so in the way of itself and trying to outdo itself that now that move would be in the match in the first 5 seconds, and then 10 seconds later, and all those moves that were saved were already used, so I had nowhere else to go. So I feel like with movies like The Raid and The Raid 2 and what that kicked off, no pun intended, there wasn't much left in terms of if you wanted to build on that, because we already reached the pinnacle of that type of martial arts. So the heightened kicks, the heightened violence, the heightened fantasticalness of it I can't remember which John Wick movie even. Doesn't he fall off a building, hit off a car, and just get up and keep going? So, and I can't remember how much of a difference the rest of John Wick movies to the first one, but I remember him being a hero that's basically like Superman in the first one as well. So, all that to say, I feel like Yo-Yo Girl and Boombox Guy and all these other things are just other elements of the evolution of what is essentially choreographed fighting. It's almost like a dance or a ballet or a theater. It's what else can I do? Where else can we go with these things? And that's why when I see these things, and I totally get your point that you've made, that there is a case that, well, this, you wouldn't see these figures, an archetype of bad guys, in relation to the heavy and the psycho. You wouldn't see the Yo-Yo Girl in that. But at the same time, you wouldn't see someone survive about 5 kicks anyway. So I don't need to make any more leaps than I'm making, because for me, I'm already watching something that's insane from the get-go, right? So when I'm seeing these crazy characters, I'm just seeing another way we can get a few extra dance steps in. Another way we can get choreography that we haven't seen before. Another way we can push fighting in movies to the extreme and give us something different. And by putting in these things that are gimmick, it's now we've got another prop to interject. An extra double kick, a Jean-Claude Van Damme splits, gun fu in the case of John Wick. So that's the perspective that I'm looking at these things with. But I can see, having talked to you, and in the terms that you put it in, I can totally see your point. And I can totally see, depending on which side you go down on, you might have that experience. And I guess that's just the way our experience was different with this. But yeah, it is interesting to think about.
Hey man, Sunday night now, just wrapping up a last little bit of weekend housework, and I might have time to sneak in another movie. It's a couple more that you've recommended that I have to get to, so might hit one of those up. I think you've hit upon a very, very interesting subject matter, and one that, at least based on just your initial statements on it there, I couldn't feel more differently about. And that is, if something is realistic, like completely unrealistic in one way or another, then it doesn't make any difference how much further you push that lack of realism. So as you quite correctly said, these fights will be over in seconds. You might manage to take 2 of those kicks to the head, but you pretty much, like, you last anything but from between 10 seconds to 45 seconds or something. The level of punishment that an action hero goes through, even in the most grounded action movies, is so intense that it renders the whole thing completely unrealistic. And at that point, if that's a complete fantasy, then why not go nuts with the characters and stuff like that? And obviously correct me if I'm wrong and if I'm like mischaracterizing you, but that sounds to be kind of why these elements don't bother you. Your man with the boombox, or as you said, like in John Wick falling off a building. I can't remember which one that's in, but it is a sequel. Falls off a skyscraper, lands in like a trash can or something, and hobbles off. And I suppose what I feel quite strongly in direct conflict with that is a film, let's take the most realistic film ever, whether that's some Ken Loach movie or even pushing it even further, it's one of these films where like you only find out after the fact that it's not a documentary. It's so banal and it's so close to life. And then take the least realistic film ever, some like crazy heightened sci-fi, anime, fantasy, even every emotion that people exert is like, doesn't really ring true. To me, they're on two ends of a spectrum, and it's not a binary between realistic films and unrealistic films. So if I take a film like First Blood, which we watched earlier this year, of course we've both seen it in the past, it's, I think you'd agree, an amazing action movie, but it's more grounded as a piece of action cinema than Avengers Endgame or I don't know, John Wick Chapter 4, right? In John Wick Chapter 4, and I could say Chapter 3, Chapter 2, that they're interchangeable in terms of how realistic they are, but you've got like these close quarter gunfights where people like holding up their bulletproof suit jackets to repel the bullets. They're getting hit by cars flying. But it's completely crazy what you're seeing on screen. And in First Blood, what he goes through and what he's able to do is unrealistic. It couldn't have happened. It just couldn't have happened to that extent, beat by beat, right? But for me, the experience of watching First Blood is that of watching a much more grounded and realistic film than the experience of watching John Wick Chapter 4, where one minute he'll be like riding a camel through the Sahara Desert, meeting some secret society in a tent, and the next minute he'll be, you know, in some like Yakuza, samurai, cyberpunk nightclub with, you know, he's in a gunfight with people while like ravers dance around them at the same time. It's like, I don't feel like I'm watching reality at all when I watch that. Whereas when I watch First Blood, I do feel I'm watching reality. It's not because it's realistic, but it's because it's using so many artifacts of realism that it makes the experience feel more realistic to me. So for me, even though some action films like First Blood are objectively unrealistic, I think they benefit from how realistic they are. And this can be pushed way further down the spectrum than just First Blood. You could go into like the difference between The Dark Knight and Batman and Robin. I happen to love both those films, even though one of them is like universally beloved and the other one's universally hated. I'm a big fan of both of them. But the choices, the filmmaking choices they made in The Dark Knight scale it back in terms of unrealisticness and fantasyness from the filmmaking choices they've made in Batman and Robin. That in no way means that The Dark Knight is a realistic movie. It just means that when you're making these things, it's not in for a penny, in for a pound. Like, well, if you made it a certain amount unrealistic, then just it is completely irrelevant how much more unrealistic you make it. For me, it's like it crucially affects the tone and the experience the more or less realistic it is. I'm not even saying the less realistic it gets, the worse it gets. That's in no way what I'm trying to imply, because as I've said, I love Batman and Robin. I think there's, you know, I love The Lord of the Rings. I love, and The Lord of the Rings is a good example of a franchise that in the hands of, you know, you make that trilogy 10 times, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be less realistic than they made it. Like Peter Jackson obviously rooted it in, you know, something very tactile and relatable, especially for people who've grown up in the countryside. And most of it is about mud and about bread and you know, getting your boots wet and stuff like that. And those are choices that radically affect the film. So when I see a film like this, and you could say it's an evolution, you could say like they've got to keep evolving medium and where they go and all that, you know, fair enough. I mean, I to me, it doesn't matter so much how we got to this point. I think that people find it entertaining. People find that kind of like Matthew Vaughn type movie. Everyone's a character. Everyone's quippy. Everyone's heightened. If you're an assassin, then you've got to have a Stetson hat and a pocket watch that when you pull it out, it like rolls a magic 8-ball in it, and then you choose which weapon. You know, you've got to have all of these like colorful gimmicks to you because people like that. And I think The Night Comes For Us is a good example of a film that's like, it is skirting up against a more serious crime drama that to me would have more gravitas, and it would lend the action scenes more of a tense, fuck, what's going to happen to these people type of outcome, rather than it seeming more memey kind of, you know, like when you watch the Kingsman movies or something, it all feels a bit tongue-in-cheek, memey. It doesn't feel real. And again, it's a choice. It's a choice that people like. It's a choice perhaps that you like. It's a choice that I have liked many times. I guess it's just a smell test on an individual movie of like, do I think that this movie made the right choice and in like kind of where it placed itself in that realism spectrum? But what I like pointedly disagree with, if you are saying this, is that at the point where the action is completely unrealistic, then I've turned off my realism checker brain and I'm like, you know, whatever. It's all just complete fantasy to me. So yeah, that's, I think, an interesting subject, because I think it's something that has been discussed in one way or another a hell of a lot when it comes to action blockbuster cinema over the last, I guess, like 25 years or so, with the Chris Nolan, Batman Begins, Grimdark, then adopted by Zack Snyder and all these directors, where they're going, let's make these, let's strip out the fantasy, make it more realistic and gritty and dark and serious. And it's created a lot of like really boring, shitty movies, because if you haven't got the goods, like if you haven't got the Chris Nolan gravitas, you haven't got the intensity of The Raid 2 and stuff like that, then you make movies that like don't have good intense action or character or plot or dialogue, and also don't have wacky fun, and you've left with absolutely no entertainment value whatsoever. I know people adore the movie Dune, the first one, but I would say that Dune is guilty of this, of like just being a brutally unfun film. But if Dune had a better plot or better pacing, because you know the issue is that it's got about an hour too much runtime, you strip out an hour of that movie, or you do something to fix the pacing and the narrative, and maybe put in a little touch more fun, and then put in, you know, better action and stuff, then you'd really benefit from that like super serious, incredibly like intense tone that he's managed to conjure in that film, with the sound and the visuals and everything. It's so powerful, it's so impactful, and it's the type of thing that's like undercut by jokey Marvel not taking it seriously type stuff. So anyway, it's interesting though. I again liked the film. I think it's conjured up some interesting conversation between us, and I kind of, yeah, I envy you really, because I think there are so many good action beats in this film that if you are more on board, and maybe I should rewatch it and on just some like random night in 5 years' time, and I might just be like completely in the mood for it, because I think they put a lot of work into it. They put a lot of time in executing all of these little moments, and I just think when you're on the right page with it, you enjoy it. And I have been on the right page for movies that have these these characteristics I'm describing. I have enjoyed the John Wick sequels. I think you didn't like John Wick when it came out, and then you, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you then sort of have followed the series as it's gone on. But if I remember correctly, the first one didn't really do it for you, and now you seem to have kind of conflated them in your head. But trust me, the first movie, it has many similarities with the sequels, but the big difference between them is it doesn't have lore. It doesn't have this crazy world of secret societies and all that. It has a bit, like it's a little camp, but it's more so just like he's going up against an organized crime syndicate that he used to work for, kind of thing, rather than the keys and the coins and the globe hopping and the wacky assassins and stuff. It's much more grounded, and it's much more of a sort of straightforward, tight little linear film. And then the other films are quite different, kind of like the Fast and Furious franchise. The first one's obviously like Point Break reskin, which is great, and then pretty soon you've got to the point where it's now like a big lore, millions of characters and callbacks and crazy heist stunts and stuff like that. It just doesn't really have anything to do with the grounded first movie. Now, if you're saying that the Fast and the Furious is a grounded, realistic film, then that doesn't make much sense unless you're contextualizing it within the Fast and Furious franchise. And then I think it's a good example again of like, on a character level and on an investment level from some people like me, there is something that first Fast and Furious movie and movies like it, where you actually care about the story and the characters and stuff, and you feel like everything has some weight and some gravity. It brings that. When I watch the modern Fast and the Furious movies, nothing means anything because there's no one's ever feels like they're remotely in peril. Someone could get kicked out of a helicopter, and you know that they're just going to land perfectly into a Lamborghini and do like some cool move and then shoot off a cliff and into a skyscraper and then shoot a bunch of people. It's not real. And when I see this stuff in The Night Comes For Us, that's like those, for example, like the lesbian assassins who are like they're such magical characters, like they don't feel like real people who like are restricted by the risks and the threat of violence that exists for normal humans. I don't like unless it's towards the end of the movie and they're fighting one of the main characters, I don't for a second think that they're going to die, and that's too fake then at that point in terms of something I can invest in. Whereas if you compare that to like Heat, the big shootout with the bank scene or something, I feel like those bullets work the way bullets work in our world. Those like you have to be standing behind something or you're going to get shot. People can run as fast as they can run. This amount of cops equals what it would in the real world, that kind of thing. So I think just having that, losing that sense of realism just puts you in a different space. And maybe I just wasn't ready for that on that night. So as I said, maybe I need to go back, watch this movie at some point in the future when I'm like, this is just going to be a load of silly fun, and then I can probably appreciate it a bit more.
Yeah, I don't disagree with your point that Rambo... Well, let's not get this into a conversation over realism or not realism. Let's talk about it in terms of realism within that specific movie. So then we'll, or at least I'll be able to stay on some kind of track for what I'm saying here. So we'll talk about Rambo. It is presented as a type of realism within that world. Therefore, if a giant robot showed up in the final act and chased after Rambo, I wouldn't let it off the hook because I'm already finding this unrealistic that this guy can do all these things, because no human being could. So I'm in agreement with you that if the movie feels realistic, then you're not necessarily going to give it a pass on all these things. If Rambo flies all of a sudden, I'm not going to be thinking, well, he already did fantastical things and he's already been shot about 7 times. So it's grand. I've already decided this isn't real. That's not what I'm actually saying. I'm saying in the context of The Night Comes for Us and the context of a lot of these post-raid movies, I feel like we're in the world of that movie. I can buy those characters. And for me, it wasn't so much silly fun as gritty popcorn fun. That's the way I view these things. And you mentioned The Dark Knight. I was also thinking The Dark Knight, and indeed The Dark Knight Rises, which I know you don't like very much. But let's talk about those movies, or at least The Dark Knight, so we don't have to get into conversation of all the things you find wrong with The Dark Knight Rise. But let's just say, at the core, it presents itself as a realistic superhero movie in that world. A realism you can buy in that world. So even though I see someone dressed as a bat, even though I see someone dressed as a cat, even though I see a crazy clown that manages to trick all the bank robbers in the opening sequence, I am still vibing with that world of the movie because I think we're in that world that isn't outside the parameters of what would happen. It's not jarring with the tone. So in the gritty popcorn tone of The Night Comes for Us, and in the way that martial arts and the way that kung fu is used, I see all these extra characters and moments as almost an extra combo to the move, an extra dance, an extra layer. I'm not seeing that as something that I'm not buying within the context of the world. So I've already allowed for the fact that the kung fu will not murder these people within a few kicks. And I don't think it's too much of a jump within this world and this tone that any of these things are out of place, in the same way someone wearing a bat costume is out of place. Or let's talk about Mad Max Fury Road as well. I'm not saying that's realistic by any means, but there's so many crazy things happen in that movie and it's amped up to 2 million. But at the same time, it sounds crazy to say, I don't see one thing out of place within that realm as well that takes me out of it. There's a guy playing a guitar on a I think it's a Joe Merton's or Merton Joe's, what do they call those wagons? Whatever. Even when I'm seeing that, I'm not thinking, come on, that's too much now. I'm thinking, okay, that is another note of this crazy symphony of music, of chaos. You've just found an extra button on the gamepad controller to make that happen. So all that is to say that in The Night Comes for Us and movies like that, I just feel like it is perfectly acceptable within the world I'm watching. I'm not giving it a pass just because I'm already watching a movie. Because I agree, sometimes it's too much. And there's another movie that's in similar martial arts that may have watched tonight, you may not have watched tonight, where they throw in something absolutely fucking insane that doesn't really jive with that world up to that point, that I went with it, even though I felt it was totally off key. Whereas with this, I don't think anything that I saw was off key with the gritty popcorn level I was watching. I thought it added to it. You mentioned John Wick as well. Now, I did watch the John Wicks a lot, I think, last year from scratch. So I am familiar. And I guess the John Wick first movie, it's more toned down than the other ones, but I do believe I had those coins in that hotel where nobody could harm anybody and all these rules. That was a small part of it, but at its heart, it was a simple revenge movie. But when I first watched John Wick, I just couldn't fully vibe with the tone of that movie, and I think the trailer misled me. So I went away with not liking the movie at all. Then when I rewatched it and I checked the vibe, I enjoyed it a lot more. So I think sometimes, and I'm not saying this is the case with The Night Comes for Us, but sometimes when you're watching a movie, I'm not saying you specifically, but let's just say anyone views the movie through the perspective and the tone that actually isn't there. So because you have that at the forefront of your mind, there's almost a conflict between what you think is there and what the film keeps on retracting from. But it's almost like when you're aware of that, and obviously I'm aware that a lot of people just give one movie a chance as a viewing experience. They're not going to go ahead and watch it again. But if you do happen to watch these things again, then you're sometimes feeling different about it. It's happened to me on a few occasions as well. And it's even the case, we've seen the evolution of these things with Westerns as well, actually. There's no reason for the person to have the two guns, the person to be able to do these specific gimmick things. I think the Seven Samurai remake, The Magnificent Seven, has those kind of roots as well, where there's one guy, he doesn't use a gun, he uses knives, and they all have these different things to them, and you're thinking, well, I don't know if it's wise to be great at knives when you're fighting against cowboys with guns. But at the same time, these are the Magnificent Seven, and this is what they're going to do. And it ticks the movie's box. We're going to get to see some cool stuff. And it doesn't take me out of the movie. And that's what I felt about anything that happened in The Night Comes for Us. And I guess that's where we probably disagree quite significantly on what those elements meant to us. But like you said, it certainly brought up some nice discussion.
Well, I agree with pretty much everything you said there. And I definitely also agree that you can go into a movie expecting one tone, and because it fails to deliver on that tone, of that kind of version of the movie that you had in your head, then you don't appreciate it, and then you rewatch it on its own terms, and you get a lot more out of it. And that could certainly be the case for me with The Night Comes for Us. Also, one little point, I'm aware that the first John Wick movie has the coins and the hotel and the rules and stuff like that. To me, the first one has elements that are less realistic and more kind of ridiculous. and then the sequels chose to go whole hog in that direction, and it, you know, build out that lore, the High Table, and all this kind of mythological characters, and all of the baddies in them being so heightened. Whereas the first movie, that was just sort of like a touch of that, and mostly a more sort of conventional revenge movie. But I think that the main point I want to make now is that we're talking about two very different things. One is realism within its own internal logic, its own rules, its own worlds, and another is realism as it pertains to our world. I think that The Night Comes for Us is completely realistic within its own world and its own rules, its own terms. It is a world where triads have gang members that are very heightened and very pop, kind of over the top, anime style. Pardon me, it's just woken up, so voice a little rough, but I think every film, except for, like you said, exceptions, are films where they establish a logic and a world, and kind of you have the rules very well worked out and established at a certain point, and then they break those rules. They're kind of anomalies, but for the most part, even the most heightened films like Speed Racer or Scott Pilgrim versus the World or whatever it might be, How to Train Your Dragon, they are realistic within their own, within the rules of that universe. But I'm not talking about that whatsoever. I'm talking about films can be more or less realistic in terms of real world realism, in the way that Rambo First Blood uses so much real world realism. You know, it is a film that is unrealistic in the sense that what Rambo pulls off, and forget about the Rambo sequels, because that's another John Wick situation where they've taken one element of the movie and ran with it, and it's you know, without it being kind of counterbalanced by the grounded nature of the first movie, it doesn't work as well. The first Rambo movie, it's more in the realm of something like Deliverance, or just some gritty little drama about some dude, like it's a Vietnam, like a post-Vietnam movie. It's a small town American movie. There's just so much visual texture. There's some, like, you know, an example I could cite is how his injuries stack up across the movie, and he's constantly having to like hold his arm up to his shoulder, or the clothing in it, everything just feels very tangible and real, and that has a massive impact to the viewing experience, in my opinion. It's not like that's the right way to do a movie. I'm not like advocating for that as being superior to something else. I'm saying that the steps that we take away from that don't necessarily improve the film for me. The over the top anime style villains, the completely inconsequential injuries. Like, you can compare the first Die Hard movie to later Die Hard movies, where in the first movie he's afraid all the time. Every time he gets any kind of injury or something, it's has an impact into the rest of the film. You go to the fourth one, like the one set in, is it the fifth one, I think, is the one set in Russia, and it's just, he's a superhero. Like, he's literally Superman. He's never afraid. He's never hurt, really. Certainly not in a way that would impact more than 30 seconds of the runtime. And it's not to say that one of those movies is realistic and one of them isn't realistic. They're both unrealistic movies. They're both realistic to the logic that they've established to their own internal realism. But the key differentiator, or well, one of the many key differentiators, but the one in this particular conversation, is that Die Hard has more of the realism of our world, And that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, I completely accept The Night Comes For Us that this is a cohesive universe. It's not breaking its own rules. It makes sense that like every badass operation is going to be run out of some like iconic location, that, you know, when they go to like collect a little girl from a house, they're going to send like 500 guys, most of which aren't armed, rather than sending 2 guys, which is what they would really do. You know, I completely accept all of the everything in the film as being realistic to the film, but and I also say that like many of my favorite movies that I would kind of I would praise for the written have very unrealistic elements. Like you mentioned The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight is a great example. There is stuff in that movie, like the Joker, for example, that are completely unrealistic. But if you take The Dark Knight and you compare it to, you know, the hundreds of Batman stories that we've seen before then, not all of them, but majority of them, The Dark Knight strips it down to something much more realistic. And, you know, there's no Bat credit card in The Dark Knight. And I adore the Bat credit card. And I think that Batman and Robin is realistic to its own. That's what it is. It's doing its own thing. This is reality in this world. But I think by bringing in a lot more of the feel of our world, like for example the organized crime gangs in The Dark Knight, in the famous pencil scene, in most versions of Batman prior to that point, they would all be dressed in crazy colorful costumes. You know, so one gang would be dressed all in like red with blue stars on their clothes and all that kind of stuff. They'd probably come in sort of swinging in and skipping around and hopping over. Like those guys, they look like they're at The Sopranos in The Dark Knight. And I think the viewing experience, for better or worse, because it's subjective, is very different. And I think it just has really, really potent implications when you bring the reality of our world into a film. And I feel like that's been the kind of the main thrust of that grimdark, grounded, serious Nolan sort of direction that emerged in the late 2000s and dominated for quite a while. And I think it's, as I said, it's not just like a magic wand where it like improves films. It is something that you have to be very consciously utilizing. But I think The Raid 2, even though, like I said, it does have a couple of characters that break this, it benefits massively, in my eyes, from things being more grounded. It means that the implications of things and the threat level of things and the stress and the tension of things is, I think, greatly increased and very relatable. And when I watch The Night Comes For Us, it all feels like a music video to me. I don't feel as invested. So yeah, that's specifically what I'm trying to talk about. I'm not talking about realism on its own terms. I think Aladdin, the Disney animated movie, is realistic within its own rules, its own universe. But I think Daniel Blake, to go to like extreme opposite end of the scale, is realistic within our world's term. And I think both films like really utilize and benefit from their own choice of tone that they've struck. And the choice of tone that The Night Comes For Us has gone for is something that people love. I get it. I've enjoyed it as well. I'm a little fatigued of seeing henchmen or henchwomen that are so over the top that I just struggle to buy them more. And I think, you know, this is just a personal thing. I have this with superhero stuff as well. I guess it's the more extreme you go into heightened, then it's less problematic almost. It's when they kind of interplay sometimes that it is difficult to reconcile. It's like, wait, how can I take this seriously as a real Chinese triad when they've elected this person as one of their highest ranking members and they're on roller skates or something? That's when it it kind of gets a bit more silly to me. But yeah, I do agree that it's about clicking into the tone, accepting it on its own terms, and going with it, enjoying it. And I think the film probably has a lot more to offer than I got out of it on that single viewing. But I suppose I'll let you know in like 12 years' time when I randomly happen to watch it again.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.